Previously on KANGAZANG Remote Possibilities. Having finally located and captured the super-powerful universal remote, Jeff and Ray's troubles should be over, in theory. They stop off at an asteroid-based drinking emporium, which is then raided by the terminally morose emo people. Tasered and captured, our heroes face trial on the planet of Emo Prime for the crime of enjoying themselves a bit too much. Chapter 10. Don't Worry. Jeff regained consciousness and realized that he was lying on his back. He opened his eyes and looked around. He saw nothing. Black. Nothingness. Blackness. He tried again. Still nothing. At first, he was sure that he'd gone blind. It was a possibility as nothing was visible at all. The ground upon which he lay was hard and cold. He sat up and began to crawl around, reaching out for a wall or a door, but found nothing. "Ray?" he called. His voice echoed in the emptiness of the dark. A disembodied voice echoed out. "Are you happy?" Jeff got to his feet, which wasn't easy in total darkness. He wasn't drunk anymore, he was certain of that. Thank goodness the beer was hangover-free, just as Ray had described it. The voice asked again, "Are you happy?" Jeff looked up, which was pretty pointless. He had no idea where he was, where the voice was coming from, or even where Ray was. "Where the hell am I?" he asked. "Answer the question. Are you happy?" "No, of course I'm not. What is this?" The voice seemed mildly pleased at this. "Would you prefer some light?" Jeff rubbed his eyes, preparing for the sharp pain of light to assault his optic nerves. "Yeah, actually I would." The light came on. For a long moment Jeff looked around. He was standing in the middle of a grey room, perfectly round, with no visible doors, and walls that stretched up hundreds of feet, where a light source was located. But still no sign of the owner of the disembodied voice, or his friend. "Are you happy now?" "Yes, thanks," said Jeff. The light went out again, prompting Jeff to grunt in annoyance. "Oh, for God's sake, stop messing about!" "I take it you're not happy now?" asked the voice calmly. "No, I'm bloody not!" yelled Jeff. The light came on again. "How about now?" asked the voice. "No, I'm still not happy." "Excellent. Remain that way and we'll all get along splendidly." Not too far away, Ray was experiencing the same treatment. He stood in an identical cylindrical room, which was the same unappealing shade of battleship grey. For him, the light was switched on. "So, what you're saying," he continued, pacing around in thought, "is that we've been arrested for the heinous crime of enjoying ourselves too much." "Not too much," replied a similar-sounding and equally disembodied voice, "at all. And you shall be tried in a court of law for this crime." Jeff sat back down on the floor. At least the light remained on. As long as he seemed angry or annoyed, he noticed that the voice was willing to talk. "Tried in court?" he asked. "Having fun isn't a crime." "It is here. It is a virus. One that you carry deep within your brain, ready to infect our people. And you will be punished for this, dealt with before you can hurt anyone." The voice seemed a little emotional, maniacal even. Jeff raised an eyebrow. "I'm a fairy. My name is Nuff," he muttered. "What did you say?" asked the voice. Jeff repeated it louder. "I said I'm a fairy. My name is Nuff. It's a joke." "A joke? Blasphemy! Let the trial commence!" The light went out. Ray looked rather worried as the light in his cell also went out. Jeff, on the other hand, was sure he'd had a little accident. When the lights came on again, Jeff was pleased to see himself standing beside Ray. He was even more pleased to find his underpants reasonably clean. But he was far from pleased to see that he and Ray had somehow been transported into a large room full of sour-faced people. Both men had experienced no sensation of having travelled anywhere, yet they looked around the place, a large courthouse of some sort. They noticed that they were both standing in the dock, which was never a good place to be standing in general. "Ray," said Jeff, happy to be reunited with the barber. "Are you all right?" Ray nodded. "Yes, I'm fine. I think we're in trouble again, though." "No kidding," said Jeff. And he wasn't. The room was populated by about 50 white-faced emos. At the front of the room, facing them, was a raised dais with a lectern placed on it. The entire courtroom was drably decorated in uninspiring shades of grey, as were the occupants. The thin, sad-looking group of emo witnesses huddled together in their collective depression and looked over at the accused with sorrowful eyes, half hidden by black fringes. "All rise," called a voice. It was the same disembodied voice that Jeff had heard in his cell. Everyone in the room instantly stood up. The huge grey door on the huge grey far wall slid slowly open to reveal a very tall man in flowing black robes. His craggy, colourless face showed very little emotion, just a sort of deep sadness. For a race called emos, they seem awfully emotionless, thought Jeff. The high priest glided in and took his seat at the end of the room. Before sitting down, he addressed the assembled group in front of him. "Mood apathetic," he said dolefully. "Mood apathetic," replied the emos in unison. Then he sat down, prompting everyone else to do the same. Ray tugged at Jeff's sleeve to encourage him to take a seat and stop gawping. "Members of the jury," began the high priest, "this is a case of the highest importance. Look ye upon the faces of the accused, and know that they are sent across the universe on a dread mission to destroy all that our very existences stand for." Jeff's eyes turned to look at Ray, while his head remained still. He whispered out of the side of his mouth. "That's a bit much." Ray hummed a yes sound. The priest continued with his opening speech. "Know ye all this? A crime of levity such as these two detestable parasites have committed is reprehensible enough, but there is more. Much more to this than ye may be aware." He pointed an accusing finger at the two frightened men. Jeff flinched. For a second it looked as though his twig-like digit would snap off and fly at his face like a dart. "The planets are in alignment, as the great prophecy says. And here before ye stand the evil one and his accomplice, also as it was foreseen." A ripple of nervousness ran through the assembled emos. The priest had successfully put the fear into them. The dusty old books in the Gothic archives of Emo Prime's Chamber of Records had indeed told of a time when the planets would line up, bringing with it the arrival of a being so evil, so corrupt to the core, that the countless years of po-faced peaceful but drab existence would be shattered forever. In some circles it was known as the coming of the joyfulness. In others it was referred to as the age of pleasure, but most lowly emos had gotten used to calling it happy hour. Happy hour. A time when, for one tumultuous hour in their history, life would become the total opposite of all they knew. Colour would fill their vision, music that dared to transcend the higher end of the musical scale, dabbling with the evil forces of high-pitched, cheerful tunes. A time when all of the millions of poor victims of this plague would see their faces disfigured by twisted, gruesome expressions known as smiles. It was a horrible thought, not because the experience was particularly traumatic, but the very thought of being thrust into this hour in the unknown frightened them. And the high priest had kept them this way, bound and captive in a life of servitude and depression. The truth was that this frightening, albeit wholly untrue legend was dreamt up by the long-dead powers that be, who outlawed positivity so many years ago. Like many religious doctrines, it began with one person in a position of power who decreed that something was wrong and that everyone should agree with him, her, or it. If someone were to ask why, the great decider had to come up with yet another lie, another frightening, and still just as untrue story or punishment to dissuade anyone from disagreeing with them, and so on. The stories were passed down through word of mouth. Hieroglyphics, handwritten scroll, printed page, wax cylinder, vinyl 7-inch single, cassette, compact disc, MP3, email, text message, tweet, holospeak, yada yada phone, and psyche blip, and the resulting story had by then taken on its own unique personality, which was, in every instance, more terrifying and totally unlike the original text. A little bit of nonsense goes a long way. Or, in other words, bad news travels fast. Needless to say, there were no Buddhist temples on Emo Prime. The case for the prosecution stood up and looked over at the accused. "My fellow emos, look upon these accused heretics and see that they stand for all that we strive to avoid. See how the colour of their hair deviates from the divine blackness that we share. Their strange garments in aberrant tones that seek to poison our vision. Are these colours not the work of the evil one?" At this point, Jeff couldn't help but smirk at the ridiculousness of it all. These sad and pale idiots were trying to condemn them for daring to seek happiness. Bad idea. The prosecutor saw Jeff smirk and pounced. "Aha!" he yelled, pointing to Jeff's grin.
Look how he mocks us even now, practising the forbidden expression here in our room of sombre justice. He tries to spread the poison that—"
"Oh, for God's sake, give it a rest, will ya?" blurted Jeff. He'd had enough of the pantomime. The crowd gasped at the outburst, then mumbled to themselves in apprehension. The prosecutor, too, was a little shocked, but still Jeff ranted on. "You lot could do with a little happiness in your lives. Look at this place. Look at yourselves. I've had more fun in an abattoir." The crowd gasped. What kind of sick individual would think of such an activity? Their minds tried not to conjure up images of Jeff having deplorable kinds of fun in a slaughterhouse. Clearly getting a little enthusiastic, Jeff stood up, gripping the front of the dock. The high priest raised an eyebrow.
"The accused will be silent."
"No, he won't. Make me," answered Jeff defiantly. Bad idea number 2. The priest pushed a grey button on his black desk, and the dock in which Jeff was standing was infused with high-voltage electricity. The current raced through Jeff as if it were dental floss made of barbed wire. Jeff grimaced as he felt his every muscle tighten against his will. The pain was excruciating. He had no choice but to endure it, shaking violently, as Ray could do nothing but look on in horror. After what seemed like an age, but was in actuality a few seconds, the current was switched off. Jeff fell back into his chair, twitching and wondering how close he'd gotten to death. Jeff turned his head gingerly to look at Ray. Not one of me best ideas, eh?" Ray looked tenderly at his frazzled friend, tears welling up in his eyes. "You bloody idiot. Shut up and let me do the talking." "I can smell bacon," mumbled Jeff. The prosecutor looked uncomfortably eager to proceed.
"Perhaps now we may continue uninterrupted? Excellent."
He turned to face the jury and paced slowly and deliberately along the line, fixing each member with his avian features, looking as though he might peck at one of their faces any second.
"As despicable and evil as these followers of joviality may be, let us not forget that we are a decent and honourable race. As is the law on Emo Prime, we shall provide these miscreants with a defence counsel, so that they may be tried fairly and justly. Is that not our way?"
The jury mumbled nervously, but the overall impression was one of agreement.
"Send in the defence counsel,"
called the high priest. Ray looked over at Jeff, who was still twitching and smoking in his chair, like a twitchy, smoky thing. "There, you see? We're being defended. It'll be all right. Just you watch," he whispered optimistically. The door opened, and in walked another identical scarecrow of a man, pale and sombre, dressed in every shade of black and carrying a piece of black paper the size of a postcard. Ray regarded the stick insect with not insubstantial shock. "We're screwed, Jeff." The defense counsel approached the bench. Looking up at the high priest, he began his opening statement.
"My lord, as is our way, I hereby declare that I am to defend the accused in accordance with the law to the best of my ability."
The high priest nodded slowly.
"Very well, if you must. Proceed."
"Thank you, my lord."
The scarecrow turned and approached the dock, where Ray and Jeff eyed their only saviour with quickly dissolving confidence.
"Members of the jury and my learned friend, I stand here today to provide a defence for the accused. Look at their misguided attempts to live a righteous life, their unfrowning features, their unknowing eyes. I put it to you that they are not truly evil, but merely ignorant of the truth. Dumb animals, fit for nothing more than menial labour. I say to you that they be taken from this court and indoctrinated in the ways of the holy ABC, so that apathy, boredom, and complacency forms a new and righteous core to their meaningless existences."
Jeff whispered to Ray out of the side of his mouth again.
"Blimey, if that's the best he's got to say, we are screwed."
Ray offered a calming thought. "Listen, if it gets us out the death penalty, isn't that an improvement?" "Suppose. Let's see what this bloke can do then, eh?" said Jeff. Ray nodded, although the main reason for it was to not let Jeff see that he'd lost all confidence by now. The high priest looked over at the accused. He straightened the bones of his back, which made a jarring, crunchy sound, and addressed his captives.
"What say you, the accused? Are you willing to accept salvation and deny your sinful ways?"
Ray blinked, thinking deeply.
"Will you surrender your very lives to follow the holy ABC in its ultimate wisdom?"
the creaking judge continued. Jeff just sat there, staring. His thinking had become rather transient and shallow after being semi-fried. The high priest coughed one of those false coughs that could be read as, "Excuse me, I'd like an answer." Ray blinked again, still trying to put some mental jigsaw pieces together. Something was missing here, but he couldn't think what it was. Jeff's somewhat shallower thoughts got to the point quicker than Ray's did.
Evidence,
proclaimed Jeff loudly.
Where's the evidence? If we've committed these so-called crimes, any trial should have evidence against us.
Ray looked at Jeff in admiration and confusion simultaneously, which made him blink speechlessly. The defending attorney looked at Ray for some sign of agreement or denial.
That thing what he said,
mumbled the befuddled barber. Turning to the right, the high priest regarded the counsel for the prosecution.
Is there any evidence to support or deny the charges?
The prosecutor nodded solemnly, and the corners of his slit-like mouth twitched. Had smiling not been outlawed on Emo Prime thousands of generations ago, he would have beamed a sinister grin.
There is, Your Honour. I submit to the court Exhibit A, an audio device that the accused willingly brought with them into the bar. This proves their intentions to corrupt the minds of our citizens and thus prove their guilt beyond the shadow of a doubt.
Proceed. Play Exhibit A, said the high priest.
The prosecutor strode over to the high priest's dais and handed him the compact disc. The high priest eyed it suspiciously, as if it were a forged banknote, and read the handwritten title.
Top Hits of the 80s.
He gave a little shiver, then slid it into a thin slot on his desk. The pale occupants of the pale courtroom mumbled nervously until they heard a faint crackle coming out over the room's PA system. Then silence reigned for 5 long seconds. The unnerving sounds of a synthesized drum fill tumbled out the speakers, signifying the opening beats of a classic Stock Aitken and Waterman hit. The audience grimaced in obvious discomfort as Rick Astley launched into his debut single. Ray began to jig about in the dock, unable to ignore the infectious rhythm. Jeff noticed this, and while he tried to throw an advisory glare at the dancing fool, he couldn't help noticing that he too was bobbing up and down in time to the beat. The prosecutor noticed this and pointed his prosecutor's finger at the humans in his most dramatic and prosecutey way.
See,
he bawled.
See how the accursed music of levity possesses their souls. Are these not the actions of the guilty?
The high priest regarded the accused with disdain, and Jeff looked down at his own guilty feet, which, in their movement, were just as accusatory as their prosecutor. Guilty feet have indeed got no rhythm. The defense counsel rolled his eyes and dropped into a chair, utterly defeated. Ray looked around the faces of the audience in shock. He'd expected the stony sneers of hatred, intermingled with twitchy grimaces of discomfort, but there were none. Everyone seemed to have their facial expressions wiped of all discernible emotion. He looked over at Jeff. "Jeff, look at them! Something's happening!" he hissed, trying to be subtle. Indeed, something was happening, and it was happening on a widespread basis. The Great Prophecy was, for all intents and purposes, law on Emo Prime, and as the capture and trial of the 2 humans was perhaps the most important event to have happened to their civilization since the prophecy was discovered eons ago, the High Counselors had decided to broadcast the trial live to every home on the planet, encouraging the public to tune in and see the perpetrators get their just desserts. Unfortunately, their plans had backfired. Every single inhabitant of the joyless sphere was listening intently as the irresistible musical masterpiece bounced around their auditory canals, and in a unique way infused their very thought patterns with a previously unknown feeling that was optimism. Optimism became happiness, happiness became joy, and joy became bliss as billions of people turned to one another and bared their teeth in a new expression, the smile. Pete Waterman, had he known, would have been so proud. In the courtroom, things were no less dramatic. Only the high priest looked unaffected, but even he showed the signs of panic as he swung his head from left to right, trying to comprehend the impossible. Emos were rising from their chairs and swaying in time, twirling and waving their arms in unabashed ecstasy. And then, something even more incredible happened. White, pallid skin warmed, filling with revitalized, enthusiastic blood flow. Lank hair that had once hung like glossy black spaghetti lightened and formed into waves as the chemical change forced their follicles to move. A monochrome, monotone planet was bursting into bloom like a garden of poppies. Ray saw his chance and grabbed Jeff by the arm.
"Come on, now's our chance to get out of here,"
he said, clambering out of the dock. Jeff, trailing bacon-flavoured smoke, followed him as they weaved through the beaming throng of revellers. A few yards behind them, the high priest called out,
"Stop the infidels! Somebody help me!"
But his time had come. As the first song had begun to fade out, another took its place. A song so utterly determined in its optimism, so unstoppable in its rhythm, and a cast-iron guarantee of bringing a warm, thawing glow to the hardest of icy-cold hearts. Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry. Be happy. The High Priest's mind soaked up the jolly sentiment like a dry sponge. He was lost forever. His cheeks cracked audibly like the mud of a sun-dried riverbed as they forced themselves into a smile, and he bobbed up and down in joyous accompaniment to the jaunty melody. Ray pushed past some more shiny happy people as he made his way to the courtroom doors. Jeff stopped him. "Hey, why don't we hang out for a bit now? We aren't in any danger anymore, are we?" Ray looked deadly serious as he produced a paper envelope from his pocket. It was the track listing of the CD currently revolutionizing the planet's population. "Read it," said Ray, still serious of face. Jeff did so, scanning the list of mid to late 1980s hits. Rick Astley, Bobby McFerrin, what's your point?" "Track 3, said Ray, urging Jeff to concentrate. Jeff read it and looked up at Ray, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. "Oh my God. The Smiths," he gasped. "Exactly," said Ray. "Heaven knows I'm miserable now. Number 10 in 1984, the most depressing song in the entire universe. If they hear that, it'll totally reverse the current effect and we're back in deep doggy doings. We've got just under 4 minutes and 51 seconds before the song finishes. Now let's get out of here while they're still smiling." Jeff was through the door long before Ray. End of chapter 10.